Hello, everyone. Welcome to this AbleNet University webinar. We are going to be talking about UDL, Universal Design for Learning. This is the number 2 webinar session. And today's focus topic is expanding opportunities for student action and expression. And how do we support it with the application of UDL learning principles. Universal Design for Learning. It begins at the design phase of instruction and the design phase of activities and materials that you are using to support that instruction. And today we are going to be talking about how can we facilitate that learning, how can we allow for the student learning goals to be achievable, especially when we are addressing the needs of a wide range of learners at different capacity levels. And how do we make sure all of them are enabled, all of them are facilitated to respond to the instruction and demonstrate what they know. So that's the focus of today's session. So really, if you think in terms of students who have complex and diverse needs, what would be their action and expression in response to instruction? So I will share with you several examples, and our focus would be somewhat on the learners with significant needs, who may have communication needs, who may have cognitive needs, who may have some motor needs. So we would look at kind of different scenarios, but in most classrooms, we serve students with wide range of communication, cognitive, and motor needs. And we want to make sure that the students are able to navigate through that information and the activities that we present so that they can demonstrate what they know in response to that instruction. Okay, what kind of experience and expertise do I bring to this webinar? That is why I have these slides showing many of the books that I have written. 2 of my major focus areas have been students with significant learning needs, complex needs, cognitive, communication, and motor needs, severe and multiple disabilities, and the other area is autism. And I have books on both of these things, and one of my books that just came out recently, it's called Students with Significant Disabilities at the Crossroads of IDEA and ESSA. This particular book focuses heavily on universal design for learning, and it is portrayed through a variety of student case examples that is tied into a lesson framework so that you see how do we present materials using UDL principles, how do we enable that student to respond to that, how do we facilitate the student engagement, and all of this is demonstrated in that book. I also have a book, it's a DVD actually, on training paraeducators who play a critical role in serving students with significant disabilities. It's important for me to know who are the people who are joining us for this webinar. So are you an administrator? Are you a teacher? Are you an occupational or a physical therapist? Please let me know. And looks like there's one administrator and a couple of other. Though a lot of people had registered maybe due to a variety of reasons. Okay, I am going to skip to the results and see. Looks like I missed it again. Looks like people are typing in, and there is an instructional technology coach, there is an assistive technology, and going into universal design for learning. This is kind of the framework that I like to think in terms of the application of the instructional framework. When you are serving students with significant cognitive, communication, behavior, or motor needs, one of the things right before you design your lesson, you are thinking in terms of the design phase to maximize student access to that lesson, to that instruction, and to the materials that you are using. The purpose is so that you minimize and reduce those barriers so that you can reach all learners and not just a few or some learners. Every learner, a learner who has significant motor needs, a learner who uses either technology or an eye gaze board to communicate what he knows. You address the needs of somebody who has significant behavior needs, and you want to be able to reach and get his attention, and at the same time provide an opportunity for him or her to demonstrate what he knows. So that's kind of the first thing that we need to think about in terms of your instructional phase. And then, of course, connected with that is your lesson, is your instruction, is are your activities or your materials engaging and enabling a kind of an interactive delivery. That's important in order for the student to benefit from that learning. And then when it comes to action and expression, are we providing optimal challenge? If it is too complex for the student to benefit from instruction, then it is not optimal. Or if it is too easy, or if an adult is doing the task for the student, if the student has significant motor needs, and if the adult is manipulating the student's hand, or if the adult is manipulating the assistive technology device that the student is using, or if the adult is responding for the student or completely, totally prompting the student with a response, then we are not providing optimal challenge. So we need to think about that, but we also need to think about how can we maximize that student's ability and the student's chance or opportunity to respond, to demonstrate what he or she knows. Both assistive technology and mainstream technology can be used for this purpose. And then for some students, the only way they may be able to participate may be through partially completing one or two steps in a task that has multiple steps. If that is the way they can do it and slowly advance to completing more and more of the steps, then that is something we need to fully exploit in order for the student to be able to show expression and to be able to demonstrate his knowledge that he has acquired during the instruction. So previously in the Universal Design for Learning webinar, I focused on the access, that how do we deliver the presentation of materials, and then we also focused somewhat on the engagement part. How do we make it interactive so that the student is actively engaged during the lesson? The heavy focus, the intense focus today will be on how do we get the student to respond, action and expression. As I said right at the beginning, learners differ widely in their capacity to navigate through the information that we present, and we want to provide opportunities for them. So one of the principles under action and expression that you will see when you visit the website, UDL Center, is how do we provide options for physical action? So some of the things for you to reflect on. What kind of options am I providing? What kind of options do you provide in the mode of physical response for the student to be able to respond physically? How, when they are navigating through a physical environment and an academic environment, how do we reduce those barriers imposed by the motor demands? Most activities place a motor demand on the task. So how do we reduce that barrier for someone who has motor difficulties? How do we provide alternate means of response? How do we provide opportunities for selection? How do we provide opportunities for completing a task? These are all some questions that you want to think about in order to expand options for physical action. Are they accessing tools? Are they accessing assistive technology? And one of the things that I'm going to be doing in this webinar is to show you various examples of tools where the student is actively responding to demonstrate action and expression. So another thing is communication. What are some options for expressive skills and fluency? Students who have significant communication needs need alternative opportunities for demonstrating what they know. Do you offer learners in the media of communication? Do you provide tools for kind of writing activities, problem-solving activities? Do you provide adaptations? Do you provide a kind of scaffolds for them to actively participate and perform the task? I think I may have missed the previous one. Yes. So let's look at some learner responses for action and expression. You have presented a lesson. You have presented materials. So what are some flexible methods that are available for the student to respond and navigate through the information? So students can respond in a variety of ways, and it's important for us to make sure that these various means, various options are available to all of the students who may be functioning at different levels and may have different needs. Some students may be able to write a brief summary after a story about a story or a non-fictional text. Given maybe a topic sentence, they can add some more sentences to that topic. Some others may be able to use sentence strips, and they can use that to present information or steps of a process. If they are doing a recipe or if they are doing a step-by-step type of activity, they can use sentence strips, and one or two words could be provided, the key words, to enable them to think about that. Or some students may be creating a collage. Let's say, I'm going to give you two examples. We just had the Black History Month, and they can create a collage of the key figures in the Black history and then add a few sentences. And some may be able to identify and select from great leaders in the Black history, and some others could add the sentence, and it could be a group project. For example, March, since we are in March 1st, which it happens to be Women's History Month, and there are some great women of history, from Amelia Earhart to Helen Keller to Mary Curie, and again, that could be a collage, it could be a group project, and some students can write summaries, some students can write a sentence, some students can collect pictures, and you can create a collage with different students participating at different levels and responding to that instruction. And they can also make a choice, given an array of choices or given a kind of a T-chart where they have to make a selection between two choices. Or they can use a response participation, and some of these things could be done, with a variety of students, but at the same time for the same activity. So they can use, when you're presenting the lesson, they can respond with yes/no cards or true/false cards or like/dislike cards when you're doing a group lesson. That is also another way for them to respond. They can, when you're on a one-on-one setting, they could use an eye gaze board and look at objects and activate a switch to make or activate a switch to respond to a question. Or they can make a selection on the eye gaze board given two choices. They can manipulate objects that are placed on a mini whiteboard, and they can make the response by choosing the correct answer to the questions. That may, of course, some of these things, so the later items, may require a one-on-one, and some of them may be a group response, like the one yes/no cards, and I will show you an example of that too. This is the group response cards, and you may ask a question like Rosa Parks, let's say. Was she a famous African-American Black History Month? Can you think of her as a leader, yes or no? Could be a thing. Or they can say, did you like the story? Did you not like the story? They can say, this story made me happy. This story made me sad. These kind of group response too. And you may say, what happens to those students who are not able to make a verbal response? And these could be yes, no, or happy, sad, like, dislike, could be programmed into an assistive technology device like the iTalk to device, iTalk to communicator, and I will show a picture later on. Or you can make the cards like the way I have illustrated on the slide, where the student can pick up the card, yes or no, happy, sad, true, false, and show it to the others. And for those students who do not have the motor grasp to pick up the card and show, you can use a couple of things. You can use either an adapted cuff, and the card could be, one card could be on the right hand and the other one on the left hand, and they can learn to kind of lift their arm up a little bit. Or you could, insert it into their hands, both cards, and they may kind of eye gaze at the right card. So there are some manipulations that you can do so that every student has an opportunity to respond during the group choral response. Another way, as I mentioned right at the beginning, is students, if they are not able to fully complete complete a task, they can maybe partially participate in that activity through making certain adjustments or one of the steps in an activity independently. Ultimately, what we want to be able to see is how much of it can the student independently demonstrate to know that he has learned or he has advanced in this particular learning goal. So let's look at some examples. Can the student respond to a question given two choices? Or those choices could be programmed into an AT device, and can the student press the device connected maybe to a switch if the student has a motor need and respond? Can, for example, you're going to be listening to the music and the student has a motor issue, and can the student turn on the music CD that is connected to an environmental control unit, and can the student activate that switch so that everybody can listen and the student will feel that he has responded. So in other words, he is able to or she is able to follow that instruction to activate that device. Can the student, for example, you're playing a board game, can the student roll the dice even if the student is not able to respond to the question? And this is where one of the assistive technology devices could also come in handy. But if the student can kind of roll the dice, and that's one way the student is participating. Let's say you're doing a microwave cooking activity. Can the student open the microwave? Another student can place the actual dish into the microwave? Can the student identify how many minutes by using, for example, there are two cards and one card says 5 minutes and another card says 10 minutes, then can the student either eye gaze or touch that one that is the right time given an instruction? So we want to maximize that student response, and we need to think about all different ways the student. So going back to kind of the engagement phase, because the student needs to be actively engaged in order to be able to respond. So that kind of precedes the response mode. So I would like to find out, among those of you who have joined us, identify the one strategy that you use the most to promote learner engagement. Do you provide your students with significant learning needs, concrete items, multisensory items? Do you incorporate visual, auditory, and tactile representational materials in your instruction? Is that the one that you use the most? Or do you use novelty to increase and sustain motivation? Or do you use choices to kind of focus on response in terms of response, and at the same time it will also promote autonomy and a sense of control? Or do you use a lot of group activities and hands-on activities? Or I don't see this much in many classrooms, but you may be the one that you provide a lot of opportunities for role play and drama, and I will explain it a little bit further because how do we do it for students who have communication difficulties? Now I'm going to move on to the survey, and this is what the survey is. Learner engagement. Identify the most used strategy to promote student engagement. Multisensory, novelty, choices, role play and drama, or hands-on projects. I think you're almost done, and I see a couple of answers here, and the multimodal presentation, that's great, humor, choices, and definitely role play, all of the above, kind of, and novelty. And since all of you have responded, okay. Okay, now moving on. A student can respond, as I said, in various ways. And now we are going to look at some technology, assistive technology and mainstream technology. One of the ways many of us can get student response is through using PowerPoint. Students themselves can create these PowerPoints, and especially if you have students with autism, that is one way they can, many of them seem to have a kind of a great affection, I would say, for computers. Maybe you can get them to create PowerPoints that they can then demonstrate to others. Maybe it's a simple PowerPoint with 4 or 5 slides about a story, or it could be, for example, stages of the life cycle of a butterfly, stages of the plant growth. They could create that and they can share it with others, and that will also enable them to interact with peers. So that's one way. They could also respond to questions using assistive technology or the variety of things that I mentioned previously, or they can contribute to a group discussion, and some of them using yes-no card, some of them using assistive technology, and some of them using mainstream technology. And there are a variety of apps these days that are available that they can use on their smartboards and on their iPads. They can point to concrete representational items, and these could be Velcroed to a mini board, and they can or an adapted book. For example, what do I mean by an adapted book? Kind of a simplified book, and the student uses the book and to kind of go over a story that the teacher has presented, and you just have a few critical and essential sentences or the key phrases from that story presented in an adapted book. And the student practices kind of looking through that book paired with visuals. Or the student may respond with an assistive technology device. And this one shows student action expression using AT, this particular slide. The first one that you see, the step-by-step, it is available from AbleNet, and it has multiple levels. So in other words, you can have a sequence of instructions, sequence of questions. How would the student use this, for example, for action and expression? Let us say the classroom is doing an interview. A student with communication needs or a student who has difficulty kind of phrasing those questions, a peer or a peer from a general education classroom can program the device, and the student can practice asking these questions, and then actually after the practice can actually ask these questions of a peer. So you can do that. Similarly, if you're doing, let's say, a group cooking activity, for every step of the activity, the student with communication needs could press the device to kind of share with the group the next step in the activity. So that's how one couple of ways you can use this for the student to demonstrate his action and expression. And the other tool is a Quick Talker, and let's say this one has 5 different levels and overlays that can be customized. Let's say you are working on the Women's History Month this month, and you are sharing some important ideas related to a famous woman of history, then you can have those pictures added to this Quick Talker, and the student can give a presentation showing the pictures and then also a word or a phrase paired with that. And this is a way the student feels empowered and also demonstrate his understanding and knowledge. And I'm sharing with you a bookworm. I just learned that this is no longer being sold by AbleNet. However, those of you who do have a bookworm, you can program a book, a simplified book or a simple book that doesn't have too many pages, and it becomes an audio book. And you can use that too for the student to practice listening to a book and practicing on his own, learning some of the vocabulary associated with that book. So moving on to the next slide. This is the one I mentioned. I talk to a communicator. This is where the student can respond in a group situation when you are presenting. It can also be used in an individual situation, but I feel the students do need to participate in group responses, choral responses, or to make choices between two activities, two food choices, two picture choices. Instead of the words yes or no, you can put two pictures and student can respond. Or if necessary for a student who is visually impaired, you can attach the word with an object that's associated with that word, and you can also attach a wiki stick to that word, or you can just put the outline of that object. You can do it with a wiki stick. It's a kind of a fiber-like item that is frequently used with students with visual impairment. So the most important thing is we provide an opportunity for the student to independently respond to questions and demonstrate what he has learned. So when we come to writing, how do we enable that student who is not able to demonstrate through on his own writing? How can we provide some options? How can we reduce the task demand in writing? So we certainly can use an I talk to communicator, and given two choices, the student responds to the question. That's one way. You can also give two picture choices, and you can provide a word bank, and given picture choices, the student completes that sentence. You can also give a sentence strip, and the sentence is written, and the student completes that sentence on that sentence strip with either a picture or a word paired with a picture. And that way they are gaining the opportunity to be able to recognize that word and place the right word in that blank, and you are enabling that student to demonstrate his comprehension and also participate and respond to writing activity. And so let's look at some learner scenarios. Jordan, he has a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorders. He is capable of good verbal skills, but he doesn't always use that. He prefers to communicate mostly through single words or sometimes using phrases, and he does not initiate communication with peers much. And one of the issues that he faces frequently is he exhibits tantrum-like behaviors, especially when he is asked to stop a preferred activity and change to a new activity. How do we get this student to respond more actively and to demonstrate what he has learned? So what are some techniques and tools that will enable Jordan? One of the things that I just mentioned is the adapted summary of the text. So in other words, this is a simplified version. Let's say, take the story, The Wizard of Oz. Can we make a simplified story with, let's say, one sentence per page paired with a picture? And can Jordan go over that? Also, in case of Jordan, it is possible that he can actually create that text himself, given some support, using a PowerPoint presentation, 4 or 5 slides, important elements from that story, and kind of inserting some pictures. Another tool for him to be able to respond is using a graphic organizer, a concept map, that kind of a story map, which provides who are the important characters in the story map. What is the setting? What is the conclusion of that story? What happens at the end? So he selecting from some pictures, always paired with text, Jordan demonstrates his response. Another thing that I just shared with you, a writing template, either using sentence strips and or word bank the student completes, or both of them together. The student, in this case, Jordan, demonstrates his understanding and his comprehension. Frame sentences. Another one is drama and role play to communicate with his peers. And I will go over each of them in a little bit. And can you do collaborative projects like the one I mentioned right at the beginning, creating a collage? And of course, in Jordan's case, he will also need ongoing behavior support, primarily visual support. So this is kind of a graphic organizer. I am showing a different example, not just Wizard of Oz. This is to kill a mockingbird. This may be used at the high school setting so that it's age appropriate and grade appropriate. And let's take this one. What should Gem and Scout do when other students harass them? Just do nothing, or share with an adult who is right in the vicinity, or should they go and tell the teacher, or should they ask the students who are harassing them to stop, or should they go home and tell their parent? So these are all things, different opportunities, and Jordan works with a peer partner to respond to this question during a group discussion. And he can certainly use a step-by-step to kind of sequence of responses. Okay, another one, response options for learners, multiple means of expression. Here, I'm giving you a different example. Let's say Jordan and his classroom, they are working on a recipe book. And this is a group project. And Jordan benefits from some peers in his classroom. And as I said, there is a wide variation in the functioning level and the ability levels of the students. So they have different tasks assigned to them, and they have opportunity to respond in diverse ways. Some students develop the text. They provide the step-by-step directions for the recipe. And Jordan's role may be just supplying one sentence or identifying the food pictures. And some students make sure all of the ingredients required for the recipes are all there. So, and the teacher provides a kind of a checklist both for the group and also for Jordan to use individually. And this may not be a one-day project. It will be a group project because it's a group project and it's kind of a more long-term. It may take them a couple of weeks to complete this project and for the students to demonstrate what they have learned. So this is kind of the group project, and this is the kind of the checklist that's provided to the student. And some of the questions that they can look at is, do you have a title? Do you have the ingredients listed? Do you have step-by-step directions in preparing this recipe? Have you added pictures? Because that's important in a recipe book. Did you check your recipe for any errors? And some of the students who are going to be the editors in this group project, they will take on that role with some assistance, of course, from the teacher. And this is kind of the tool that you can use. And we are moving on to another example. This is in mathematics, and Jordan's class is studying the measurement unit, and they are looking at different tools, and they are looking at different functions of tools, and they are actually conducting some mathematics activities on estimation, observation, estimation, and making calculations. And how does Jordan participate to assist with this group project? The students are comparing and contrasting the different temperature, the outside temperature and the inside temperature, and they are maintaining a temperature log for a week with each other working together and the peer support. And by the way, these are examples taken from my recent book. Jordan matches in his task, the assigned task for him. He is matching the measurement tools with their function. I am mentioning here IntelliKeys, the keyboard. It's an alternate keyboard. It comes with a certain software, and AbleNet is no longer associated with it. But you can also create kind of two columns, the tool and the function, and using some pictures and text, this activity can be completed by a student like Jordan. Or you can use software to create a kind of a chart on the computer and print it out, and you can attach objects. And someone like Jordan can do that too. And another example that I'm sharing there is measuring area and perimeter. Now all Jordan has to do, while his peers are actually measuring it, he can walk around and count the number of steps around this particular rug or a mat, or you can use masking tape and make a rectangle, and they measure the perimeter and the area. So these are all ways that they demonstrate active participation and at the same time action and expression. Role play and drama. It is important that we find ways for students to actually demonstrate what they have learned through drama and role play. You can have the script for role play. Let's say you're doing Wizard of Oz and the different characters. Maybe 1 or 2 sentences for each character is programmed into an assistive technology device, and the student activates the device to communicate that. And some students may be able to say it, and maybe someone like Jordan, who can communicate using words and phrases, can learn that by practicing and rehearsing it and shares it with the classroom. And there will be so much fun, enjoyment, and it involves movement, and drama and role play will increase the joyful nature of learning, and it will increase their eagerness to respond to. And we have another learner, Anna. She has visual impairment, and she also has attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So she is verbal. She can use limited number of words, but she tends to perseverate. One of our preferred activities, so it is important to kind of tap into what their preferred activities are. She likes to sing, and she sings to herself frequently. But she has difficulty when new concepts are presented, and she has difficulty reading text, and she is not at the Braille stage. And that causes some problem with processing information when she has read the text. One of the things unfortunately, one of the behavior issues that she has is she likes to move around the classroom, and when she is redirected, she tends to become aggressive. It says learner scenario 3. It should really be 2 continued. So how do we increase access and engagement? How do we use our tools to get her to respond? One of the things is you increase engagement through using novelty and concrete items so that it can increase her working memory, because she has difficulty processing the information and transferring it to long-term memory. She can manipulate the object so that she has tactile input, and that will transfer to her long-term memory so that she can make choices. She can touch the correct item to indicate her response. In order to support appropriate behavior, you do want to use some rule cue cards that are attached with WikiStick to remind her. So in other words, a picture of chair. Either you outline that picture with puff paint or with WikiStick, and she feels that and she practices that, and every time she is reminded with the auditory input, she also has the opportunity to feel that to return to her. And again, at Anna's desk, there is her photo with a favorite object that is attached to a card along with her photo. And she does have some residual vision, and she can use that to enable her to return and feel her desk and her photo and the object. Sorry, I wanted to show you another example. And these are kind of foam die cuts, foam, you could call it pictures, foam objects that can be connected. Let's say this one is for Charlotte's Web, and this would be helpful for someone like Anna so that she can feel it. Of course, you won't be using all of that at the same time. You know, you would take each aspect, story theme or the setting, the characters, and get Anna to respond using that, and this is Velcroed to the story map. And the another one is a storyline or a sequenced timeline, and this is particularly helpful when you are doing a science activity like the one I mentioned earlier, like a life cycle, the stages of a butterfly, or the growth of a plant, or a historical timeline like the Black History Movement or Martin Luther King's lifetime achievements and different things. When your student can express his understanding and knowledge through pasting objects, Velcroing Velcroing pictures paired with text on this sequence chart. Another tool for Anna would be something like this, where objects or photo are attached to a word bank, and the student completes the writing activity, kind of taking these Velcroed objects or Velcroed photos and completing the sentence. That's another way the student demonstrates his or her knowledge. So these are some tools, again, objects for somebody who is visually impaired that can be used, and in that graduated number line where below the numbers you have some dots, you can put tiny plastic chips, or you can place tiny dots with puff paint, and the same thing you can do with the numbers so that the student can feel the numbers. And so again, there is a survey as we close this presentation. What is the most commonly available option for your students to demonstrate action and expression? Do you use a lot of graphic organizers, assistive technology device, or do you use a writing framework, or do you use a T-chart to make selections, or do you use group response? You may be using several of them, but I'm talking about the one that's most used. Okay, go ahead and complete the survey to indicate one of the most commonly available response option for your students. Looks like several of you use graphic organizers. A lot of you use assistive technology devices. I'm sure you had them independently respond, not assisted by an adult who is kind of manipulating their hands. And one of the other options that you may want to consider is a T-chart where they are responding. And also, maybe you may want to also consider some ways during your lesson itself, not immediately following the lesson, if there are opportunities, increased opportunity for group participation, that will also be helpful. Okay, and as we close, one of the things is you want for those students who are able to demonstrate a lot of self-control. You want to be able to encourage that, to enable them to do their own self-monitoring, their own goal setting, where they want to go in the future. And one of the things that would help for a student like Jordan is to be able to use self-calming and self-monitoring in order to improve his behavioral options. What are some self-calming techniques? One of the critical things I feel is that every classroom, especially if it is a classroom that serves students with significant needs, but I feel it can be in any classroom, even an inclusive setting, there is a small space available for the student who is included in the general education setting, as well as a student who is in a self-contained setting, a safe space where the student can go to calm down if he or she feels agitated, and he or she is trained to use a timer to go to that space and to be able to calm down and return back to instruction. Of course, this has to be very carefully monitored, and we have to make sure that it is being consistently and appropriately used, and the student will need training in that. And it is important for us to train students like Jordan and students like Anna, when they feel agitated and anxious, to kind of calm down with simple counting techniques and some mindfulness techniques which are emerging as evidence-based. They are just emerging practices at this time. There is quite a bit of research showing they are effective in helping students to calm down and return to focus and attention. There are a number of resources listed here on this page, and the two resources that you would particularly find helpful, serving students with severe and multiple disabilities and students with significant disabilities at the crossroads of IDE and ESSA. They present a lot of UDL-based adapted tools, and you may find them multiple dozens of tools that you may find helpful. And I want to thank each and every one of you participating in this webinar. I will certainly address those chat questions in just a few minutes, but I also want to thank AbleNet for hosting this webinar. Without their constant and continuing support, we will not be able to share these webinars. So a big thank you to AbleNet, and a very big thanks to all of you who joined this webinar. So next, I will move on to the chat questions so that anything that I need to clarify, I will clarify. Okay, one of the questions is, what device is she talking about? What devices? I'm not quite sure about this question. I'm talking about a variety of AbleNet devices and devices that are available from assistive technology. One of the things that I could mention here, sometimes we go all the way and choose a device that has 64 icons and 32 icons, and then that becomes too challenging for the student. So it is important to begin with devices that are much simpler, with 2 options or 4 options for them to respond, and then move on to something like a super talker which could be used at group activity, but it could also be programmed for an individual to use, but it may have 4 to 8, and then gradually move on. So that's what I'm talking about. I was also mentioning the step-by-step, and that's a sequenced device where the student has opportunity to press the device to move on to the next step and the next step and the next step, and it's a sequence of responses or sequence of questions, sequence of directions that can be programmed into that device. I was also sharing with you an iTalk2 communicator, for example, that is similar to a 2-selection chart, which I will go into in just a few seconds. And the other device that I was talking about was the Quick Talker. That's also a device that's available from AbleNet, and that one you can program it just like the other devices, and you can connect it to a topic or a theme, and you can put in pictures connected to that theme. And it offers 5 different levels and somewhat more icons than a simple one like an iTalk2 communicator. So I am moving on to the next question, and the question is, I didn't catch what a T-chart is. A T-chart is you're given 2 choices. Was Martin Luther King associated with the Black History Movement? And the other option could be Martin Luther King was not associated. Or it may say, the question is, who was associated Black History Month? And you are given 2 choices, Martin Luther King, and the other choice is Amelia Earhart. And the student chooses Martin Luther King. So there are different ways you can use. You can also use it for yes or no response, but I would prefer, in terms of a choice, to use actual question and the student chooses a response. You can use it in a variety of ways. It can be used, for example, the student chooses between 2 activities that he or she wants to do. That can also be used as a T-chart. T-chart is exactly what I mean. 2 choices are given and the student responds to that choice. Thank you very much. And this closes the webinar. And thank you again for everyone who joined this webinar. And together, let's help empower many more students for their action and expression. Thank you to AbleNet again. Bye-bye.